Next speaker is Dr. Jeff Haberl, a professor of architecture and associate department head for research at Texas A&M University. He's a co-principal investigator on the lab's Texas Emission Reduction Program, where he provides technical leadership for the code compliance calculator and emissions calculations from energy efficiency and renewable energy. He's an ASHRAE Fellow and IPM VP Fellow. Dr. Haberl's educational background includes BS, MS, and PhD degrees from the University of Colorado at Boulder and postdoctoral research at Princeton University's Center for Energy and Environmental Studies. Jeff, come on.
Well, howdy. Thanks for taking your time out to come to CATEE. We're very interested in trying to convey to you some of the great information, in particular for our lab, some of the work we've done to try to quantify the emission savings from the energy efficiency and renewable energy programs over the last year. I would like to say that I have the privilege of presenting the work of others. So when I say we, it's not just me, it's basically other people turning the knobs and cranking out the numbers. And this is the faculty and staff that actually work on the project there, and many of them are at the conference here. So I owe it to these folks to actually produce the work that I'm going to be presenting here today. In addition, we have a large number of people at other agencies that we rely on in terms of numbers to try to get the roll-up information that we're going to be showing you here today. So I've included a bit of a slide there so you can see just exactly what the team of individuals are that produce the work that I'm presenting. Our legislative work is Dub mentioned, is an ongoing set of instructions beginning in 2000, 2001 and proceeding through each legislative session. There's been specific House bills and Senate bills that have requested the laboratory to do work on certain issues. And I don't expect you to read this, but there they are, okay? And as Dub mentioned politely, there wasn't a lot done in the last session, so really we had no new responsibilities added. In fact, with the reduction in a lot of the funding for state agencies, we've actually been operating under a bit of a deficit in terms of the budget. But nonetheless, we still have all these responsibilities that we have to perform. We are trying to quantify the NOx emissions reductions, not the carbon, so the NOx emissions reductions that could be traceable to things that people are doing in a multitude of residential, commercial, and renewable sites. We have to follow a set of rules, and those rules get updated slowly. We're still operating under the initial set of rules from the 2004 EPA State Implementation Plan SIP credit, where we have to make sure that what we do is quantifiable. We have to be able to defend that quantification. We have to make sure that it's surplus, it's not accounted for in other programs. In the case of many of the things that we do, we have to see if it's actually enforceable. So for example, a building energy code is an enforceable mechanism that actually says you need to build a building a certain way. If it's not, it goes into voluntary measures. So we have to work closely with TCEQ that we make sure that we dot our I's and cross our T's accordingly. Last but not least, we have to do the record keeping on this. And we basically have a data cube each year. And we review that data cube with TCEQ and EPA, where we go through the multiple layers, as you'll see in a minute, on the types of calculations that we have. We have a number of other agencies that work with us on feeding information into that. I'll show you some of the results of that in a minute, but all of these follow these criteria from the EPA. This graph is particularly useful because it gives you an idea of what's really happening. These are some older GIFs from 2009, but this is what it's all about in terms of NOx emissions reductions. When we're having a bad day in Texas, a bad ozone day, that's what it's all about, trying to push those away, trying to get rid of those days. It's a long, hard struggle, and it's not going to be resolved anytime soon. It happens at different times. It happens in different places for different reasons. But at the end of the day, the combustion byproducts, the NOx, that are made from things that are burned to make electricity, from cars that are running down the road, and that sort of thing. When they happen in the wrong place, at the wrong time of year, when it's hot and when it's sunny, you get ozone. And if you didn't know, ozone is a poison. It's not good for you. If you have things like asthma and that, you're well aware of it on ozone alert days. But that's the main objective of what we're after, is to trying to get these rates to be reduced around the state. And we're making great progress in that area. In general, we've seen that a lot of success that we've had has been in providing tools and information for others to use. One of those is the International Code Compliance Calculator, which is a full hourly simulation that we've developed for single-family, multifamily, and commercial buildings. You log in through a web page that has our participating agencies. For each of the pages that follow then, you have a sequence of information that you put in for your particular building. The walls, the windows, the insulation, mechanical systems, domestic water heating, roofs, ceilings, shading. At the end of the day, when you're done, we give you a checklist that basically says, here's your building, and here's how it compares to something that's built to code. If you get the green check, you basically get a certificate off the web page. You also get a stick-on label that you can then put on your electrical panel that stays permanently with the house. So it tells each person that buys that house in the future, this house was built to the prevailing code at that time. We found that extremely helpful, and by listening to our builders and our code officials, we provided things simple as this to try to get a uniformity to the way that the buildings are built around the state. On the back end, we're tracking each of these simulations. So we basically have top 10 counties in Texas, and we've got thousands of simulations coming from each of those counties. We can also look at individual measures and where they're occurring in the state. For example, are people putting in air conditioners that are above code? Where and how many and how much? To date, from September through the current date, we've had 19,000 certificates that are in our database. The total from the beginning of time is pushing about 40,000, 45,000 certificates. So we're beginning to get a pretty good pool of information that's available for people to dip into. In fact, we've had a number of people that have requested, do we have to use your web page? Why can't we come in through a back door and just access your computational engine? So we've been listening to that, and we've actually developed an API that's going to allow others to come in and use the engine, and they don't have to use the back door. They don't have to use the web page to do that. They can actually operate it through an API. We've had a number of utilities as well as private entities that have approached us with that, and we're in the process of rolling that out on a licensing basis. So what that means is that you don't have to spend 10 to 15 years developing and certifying an hourly simulation. You can just tap into the engine that we've got and run it. We found by listening to some of our stakeholders, this was more meaningful than us just continuing to churn out numbers. They wanted to get in and run the engine themselves. So we're providing that in the coming months. In terms of our savings, we've actually been able to roll up the savings and put a number figure to it. So we asked questions, for example, over the years, the different building codes that we're rolling through, which is 2009 to date, and we're now moving into the 2012 code. We know how many houses are built because we look at the databases where they account for those houses. And in particular, up through 2011, you can see that there was a substantial drop beginning in 2006, 2005, and then rolling out up to present date. That drop has reduced the number of houses that are built each year. Over time, when we look at the savings from these houses, and this is in a report that we published, we can actually calculate by county, by power plant, how much the savings have accumulated. So from 2002 through 2011, the electricity savings that Texas citizens did not have to pay has exceeded $1 billion. The demand savings This is something we didn't think about it right away, but we realized, you know, if you've got these houses that are more efficient, you've got power plants that aren't being built. So the demand savings are on the order of another $1.2 billion in savings. So for a total now through 2011 of about $2.3 billion of savings to state, to the citizens of the state. The cost of that is less than $1 billion, far less than $1 billion. So we've already paid things back within the 10-year period of the beginning of the code cycle. In terms of the demand reductions, it's more than a power plant now. It's more than a standard power plant for the state. And in terms of emissions reductions, think of it as 400,000 cars that are not on the road right now. So the emissions that we would have in the state if we hadn't started the code work back in 2001 would be like having another 400,000 cars on the road. You can get an idea of how much more pollution we would have from that. So it's been very impactful. And these are some of the things that TCEQ and the legislatures have asked us to account for with the emissions reductions. Similarly, we've looked at other things, for example, the water savings that are associated with electricity that didn't have to be generated. So for each power plant around the state, there's water associated with it. That water savings rolls up to somewhere around slightly less than 600 million gallons per year, about 5.7 billion gallons per year if you look at the total TERP, which if you're more of an agricultural type person, that's about 1,800 acre feet just from the residential savings in about 17,000 acre feet of water. So that's a lot of water that didn't have to be pumped to cool the power plants, that didn't have to provide the electricity because of the savings from the code compliant programs. Similarly, we've looked at renewables around the state, photovoltaics, solar thermal, hydroelectric, biomass, landfill gas, as well as geothermal, and of course, the biggest one of all, wind. What we found is something you would expect and is well known. Wind is one of the largest savings in the state. To date, through 2012, we've got about 11.1 gigawatts in ERCOT, about 11.5 gigawatts total in the state. That's generated somewhere around 3 million megawatt hours total peak wind generation. The unfortunate thing is that's at the time of year when we don't have ozone problems. It tends to be in the spring, early to late spring. If we look at the summertime period, that's the lower portion of the curve there. Surprisingly enough, that has been on the rise now, somewhere around 17 million megawatt hours during the ozone season period. So we've seen a substantial increase in the installations. We've seen total megawatt hours increasing from the renewables. We've also seen increasing in the dog days in the summer as well, because those wind sites are more and more being built in places where there's a high capacity factor. Around the state, we've got roughly 84 wind projects that have been completed. 28 have been announced. One has actually been retired. I didn't know you could do that, but there it is. Each of these projects we have to weather normalize. Because we've got data that we're taking in the current year, we have to cast it backwards into the base year that the EPA is allowing for the emissions reductions. Currently, we're using 2010 emissions reductions, so we have to cast it backwards. For each of these power plants then, wind power plants, we have to calculate the actual wind. We go to the wind that's given in a particular year, and we can see, for example, is the amount of electricity coming off these wind sites more or less than what they put in? We call that degradation. Okay. So, for example, if we look at the Indian Mesa site, about 82.5 megawatt capacity site, it was initially installed at 48 megawatts. Over time, each of the months that we look at the data, it's actually increasing over time as they've added more turbines to that particular site. So we haven't seen any degradation. This is one of the issues that TCEQ was concerned about. When you put a wind turbine in, does it break? And if it breaks, how fast do people fix it? It wasn't obvious to us at first, but since the wind turbines are put in to make money, if the wind turbine isn't turning, then the people aren't making the money off their wind turbine. So clearly, when it breaks, they fix it very quickly, and the data shows that for each of the sites that we're tracking. Over time, when you look at the total annual numbers coming off of the sites, we look at what's the difference between the design and the measured capacity. Are these plants operating at capacity? What we found is that 13 sites are operating at full capacity. About another 19 sites are in the 95 to 99% range. And just 5 sites are operating less than 95% capacity. This is phenomenal when you think about it in terms of putting a technology in and then keeping it running so that it's producing what you've asked it to do. We roll these up and we do the weather normalization. So from 2012, we then cast back to 2008, which was the base year. It actually goes up for the total wind capacity on an annual basis to 30 million megawatt hours per year. On an ozone season day, it drops down because we can have hotter or colder periods during that ozone season day, dropping down to about 52,500 megawatt hours on an ozone season day. In general, each of our numbers have to get put through eGrid. This is the latest version of eGrid, which is available on our website. It's the 2010 eGrid for Texas. It breaks the state into 4 congestion management zones now, a little bit different than when we started the program. There's what they look like, the west, north, south, and Houston zone. And for each of these zones, you have to account for the electricity within the zone, and it's how it's passing back and forth between the zones. This is what it looks like on a county basis as we push the megawatts around the state through the different congestion zones and then feed it into eGrid to actually do the NOx emissions reductions calculations from the megawatt hours. At the end of the day, for the ozone season period in 2010, we have just a single graph instead of each of the 4 graphs. When we do the roll-up on these, for example, for the renewables, we see that a large portion of the renewables, the green portion right there, is actually the wind energy. The next portion associated with that is the other stuff, which is growing. Okay? In this case, excluding the wind, solar has had a significant increase in 2012 over 2011. So has landfill gas. Hydroelectrics increased a little bit, mostly because we've had a rainier year this year versus the previous year. The dip in 2011 is what you would expect because we had such a hot, dry year. Most of that dip was in the hydro. Okay? So all of these get rolled up into the renewables, as well as the tracking of specific photovoltaic sites, 3,000 of those, 38 solar thermal, 121 hydro, 45 landfill gas, and 279 geothermal sites around the state. We then pull together these numbers as well as numbers from the other state agencies that are reporting to us, including the PUC, SECO, the ERCOT with the reporting of the wind energy savings. And then we've added to that a couple of other things that we know are real or quantifiable. For example, the change out in the efficiency of the air conditioners to SEER 12 for single family and multifamily. We do the roll-up on these, and then finally we post the savings either by county, by SIP area, by ERCOT region, or whatever. Okay? And we end up with the following. So for 2012, using the new accounting methods, we're seeing about 12 tons of NOx savings on an ozone season day. All of these are documented on reports on our site, which you're welcome to visit. Our site has been reorganized slightly so that you can access these reports a little more easily. There's a listing of the reports for 2012 and 2013, some of our draft reports. So we'll be happy to provide information for anybody that asks for it. Thank you.